Today on CityCast DC, aging isn't something that most of us like to think about, but it's something all of us will experience. And in DC, older residents are more likely to face memory challenges like dementia, which occurs here at higher rates than in much of the country. But a new approach to elder care might offer a better path forward for how the city supports its aging population. Washington Post reporter Michael Brice-Saddler explores what aging in DC looks like today and what it could become. Today's Monday, November 24th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Bridget.
So I have a little bit of a personal connection with this. Before he passed away, my dad dealt with dementia, not in DC, but I know that getting help for folks who have dementia and support can be tough, can be uphill, can be complicated, can be very emotional. What made you want to dig into this?
Well, it was a few things. It was interesting. In the course of reporting this story, I found that almost every individual I talked to had some similar personal connection, whether that's a parent, a family member, a friend. Everybody seems to be dealing with this battle that really speaks to the ubiquity of the issue. And then the second piece was that I was interested in a nonprofit in DC called Iona that was starting to do these dementia screenings at senior homes across the city to help bring awareness to dementia and help give seniors a free entry point into even thinking about potential memory loss. And I thought that that was a really kind of noble idea. And then through reporting that out, I learned a bit more about these dementia villages and how that's become a talking point in the city over the past few years.
So something that I learned from reading your piece that I did not know is that DC really does have an issue with dementia. 16% of DC seniors are living with dementia caused by Alzheimer's disease, and that rate is higher here than it is in other parts of the country, according to the Alzheimer's Association. Why is it so much higher here in DC?
Right. So because it's hereditary in some cases and it's caused by lifestyle in others, you have a large population of Black DC seniors, and Black people are more likely to develop dementia than white people, twice as likely, in fact, who have conditions. They have conditions like high blood pressure, heart disease, things of that nature that can also contribute to a higher likelihood of dementia. So you have a variety of circumstances, mostly health related, that are affecting DC's Black senior population. And what you also find in the Alzheimer's Association data is that Baltimore and Prince George's County are also within that top 5 ranking when you look at the county level. So it's really this corridor on the East Coast where you have a large percentage of Black seniors and then a healthcare infrastructure that has some weaknesses in DC, I think particularly east of the Anacostia River.
So really, it's a story of the same old health disparities that we're all probably pretty familiar with already.
Yeah.
Earlier, you mentioned this novel approach to dementia care that you looked at that's taking place in the Netherlands. Like, what's happening there? What's so novel about this approach?
Yeah, so in the Netherlands, they obviously they have a very different healthcare infrastructure than we do in the U.S., but their focus when it comes to end-of-life care and particularly dementia care is how can we make the quality of life as good as possible for someone in their final years versus, how can we intubate them or pump them full of medications or whatever else to just preserve them as long as possible, even if that's not a high quality of life. So it starts with that framework of how can we make people feel well and like themselves for as long as possible versus just trying to extend life. So when people move into this dementia village, it's called the Huisweg, there's an expectation that you are going to die there. They're going there knowing that they're going to die there. The average stay for residents, and there's about 188 residents in total at a given time, is 2 years. And they are not spending a lot of times, bedridden or being looked at by doctors. A lot of it, that stuff is included, but most of it is just living life in a semi-contained environment where you have resources within an arm's reach. You can go to the grocery store and you can go back home and you can help make a meal for you and some of your other roommates or housemates who are living in a home with you. And they sort people by things that they have in common, even sometimes when they were born. So they have these shared associations that can help with dementia as well.
Yeah, something that you mentioned that when I was dealing with my dad's care, which is sort of hard, like a hard pill to swallow, which is that in the journey of getting care for a loved one, there comes a point where it's no longer beneficial to them to be looking for treatments that are going to rehabilitate them or make them better. And that at a certain point, you're just sort of ensuring that their final days, months, years are filled with tests and doctors and exams and being poked and prodded. And it was really a kind of it took some emotional work to accept what you've talked about, which is that, you're at a certain point, you're not necessarily making sure that their final time is going to be feeling good. And that even if those tests and pokes and prods could extend their life, would that actually be doing them a benefit? Sometimes I think it's easy to go into these conversations thinking, whatever the outcome is that will extend my loved one's life, that's the outcome that I want to choose. And that's not always the case.
Right. It's not always the case. And there's this great example that these presenters from the Netherlands, the co-founders of the Hojeweg, came to DC in September for a symposium that the community held to explore the possibility of a dementia village. What would it take to bring it here and what might it look like? So the co-founders of the Hojeweg talked about the fact that, it's about wellness. It's about living. And they give this example of a man who, I think he was in his 80s or something, and he smoked a cigar like every single day. And they have him on video smoking these cigars. And you're kind of like, okay, that's interesting, in this environment that he's doing this. And eventually he dies in the story. And the point being that he was really happy in those last couple of years smoking his cigars every single day versus having those maybe taken away. And he's miserable without this thing that he really liked. And maybe that gives him another year or two. But is that really living? And it's a very compelling conversation because I think in the United States, we look at healthcare totally differently. It's about how can we extend, preserve, keep someone around in a lot of cases.
What were some of the takeaways from that symposium?
Well, I had never heard of a dementia village until I started exploring the story a little more. And then this symposium comes to town. And I think what was interesting is you had this mix of people in the local healthcare industry. So you had actually DC's former health director, LaQuandra Nesbitt. You had experts at George Washington University. You had developers, people in the housing sector. You had people from DACL, which is DC's Department of Aging and Community Living. You had DACD, the housing department, and so on and so forth, because everyone has a common goal. And there's an understanding that seniors in the city need more housing. There's an understanding that there's going to be a lot more seniors, not just in DC, but across the nation very soon. The U.S. Census projects that by 2030, or 2034, they're going to be more people 65 and older than 18 and under in the United States. So that just gives you a picture of like how big a deal this is going to be. So it's a matter of how do we mitigate this? How do we develop housing now that can cater to people who have memory issues because they have different needs and requirements than just any assisted living facility. And right now, DC is really lacking in memory care housing, particularly in Ward 7 and Ward 8, which, as far as I could find, there is not any.
Wow. So in order to mitigate this, could these Netherlands-style dementia villages potentially work in DC?
I mean, they could. It's definitely a loose concept right now, and certainly nothing has been finalized or approved, but there is real excitement and momentum toward a model that perhaps maybe is not a one-to-one on the Hojeweg, but is something kind of hybrid. And Iona, the nonprofit that I mentioned earlier, actually explored their own version of this a few years ago because Iona has day centers located around the city, adult day centers, one in Ward 3, one in Ward 8, where caregivers or people with memory issues can go in and they can just get support during the day by staff. They can ask questions, they can get resources for Alzheimer's and dementia, or they can just go and get a free meal. So the thought would be that Iona would get some grant money to create a group housing situation where, maybe 10, 15 residents would live full time. And then during the day, they will be able to go out in close proximity to these day centers where they're getting the resources and care. And then they're going back home to the group house where there's also individuals who are there to care for them and help their medical needs. So this is something that has been explored. The problem is it's really expensive. Dementia villages, you can imagine, not just to create, but also to pay for and to live there. And you have a large percentage of DC seniors who are on Medicaid decade. So the question is, how do we do this in a way that's also affordable for people? And truthfully, I think that's going to be a long conversation, but the fact that the lead developer on the Fletcher Johnson Middle School site redevelopment, is really keen on this dementia village idea. He runs 2 assisted living facilities in Ward 7, but they can't offer specialized memory care housing there because that's not what they're licensed for. So he's trying to meet this need also. When I say the developer leading this project is trying to meet this need also because they've noticed that at the 2 assisted living facilities they operate in Ward 7, there are a lot of seniors who are starting to develop memory issues, and then they have to go to a more urgent form of care or intensive form of care that actually ends up being more expensive for the healthcare system overall. So everyone wants to figure out, how can we let seniors live with more dignity, really die with more dignity, and then also lower the cost of healthcare for everyone. And that's not going to be figured out right away, but it is interesting that DC's really trying to explore that right now.
This holiday season, DC small business needs our support more than ever. That's why we're excited to tell you about the DC Holiday Hunt, a citywide scavenger hunt that makes supporting local shops and restaurants fun and rewarding. It's simple. Earn points by visiting small businesses, exploring neighborhood landmarks, answering trivia questions, and sharing your favorite holiday traditions. With over $3,000 in prizes from local DC businesses up for grabs, there has never been a better reason to explore our city. The hunt runs from November 23rd through January 3rd. Visit districtbridges.org/DC Holiday Hunt to sign up today. That's districtbridges.org/DC Holiday Hunt. Life can flip on a dime. One minute, everything's normal, and the next, someone else's mistake shakes your world upside down. And that's when you need a team you can count on. NACE Law Group has been standing up for DC families for decades, fighting for neighbors hurt by medical malpractice, wrongful deaths, and serious injuries. They don't just settle quickly or push papers. They dig in, fight hard, and make sure every client gets the justice they deserve. And here's something that I personally love about them. They are a longtime supporter of this very podcast. Because just like us, and just like you, they care about this community and the folks who call it home. So if you've been hurt or someone that you care about has, just pick up the phone. Call NACE Law Group. They'll stand with you, fight for your family, and make sure your rights are protected. And who knows, maybe you'll even see him at a CityCast live show. Visit WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com. That's WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com. People who have never looked into it or never had to price out what it costs for things like memory care, it is so much more expensive than you think. Like, I'll just put it that way. It is so prohibitively expensive, and it's awful. And I'm wondering, here in DC, you mentioned that the site that they were talking about is not licensed for this kind of facility. Are there plans for where you could put something like this in the city?
Well, so the facilities that aren't licensed are the existed assisted living facilities that this developer operates already that are opening. One is by Benning Road Metro Station, and another is in Ward 7. But this site, the Fletcher Johnson site, the goal would be to either find some changes to the law or find some creative ways to enable that site to provide the memory care housing that's lacking. So that's the hope, is how do we take advantage of this really rare opportunity? You have a very big campus that the mayor wants to see become a mixed-use development with retail already. So you think about the components of Dementia Village, you have markets, you have things like that. So it's feasible, yes. But one thing we know about DC developments is things move very slowly. However, I can't think of a time where I'd seen that many different stakeholders, if you will, in the development space, health space, all coming together around one idea and believing in it very strongly. So I would say I'm hopeful based on what I saw, but we're still a ways away from, I think, getting that type of facility in DC, but I do think it's possible.
That's so interesting. And, I know that you were talking about how expensive this kind of thing would be, but the idea is that ultimately this type of care would cost our public health system less in the end if done right.
Precisely. That's exactly it. So it's kind of like, how do we get there? And it's probably going to be pretty expensive to get there. But once this type of infrastructure is set up, I mean, it will be such a unique and great opportunity for seniors with dementia in DC. One stat that stood out to me as I was reporting the story is that 40% of the city seniors live alone. And living in isolation is one of those many, many factors that contribute to dementia and Alzheimer's. So if you're not getting that socialization, if you're not part of your community, if you're not engaging with your family or you don't have family or neighbors, that can really just accelerate the process as far as dementia and Alzheimer's is concerned. So, this is really a story about compassion more than anything, and not forgetting that seniors are members of our community too, and they're valuable members. And a lot of the other conversations happening in the city with health advocates is how can we, not just in DC again, but as a society, make sure that seniors who still have a lot to offer can offer that in a rapidly changing world where it's more reliant on technology, especially. And that's a bigger challenge than guest housing.
Absolutely. And I do think that DC is in this unique position where it is a little bit easier to get around without driving compared to some other places. And that, I think that you're exactly right that when you are aging, if you are dealing with something like dementia and decreased mobility and all of that, if you are someplace where you have to drive around and you're living alone, you have to layer in isolation on top of that, which makes all those conditions worse. I think DC being a place that you can get around without driving makes this. I think we're in a unique opportunity where we could actually find a way to, help seniors live less isolated lives that are ultimately going to make their health outcomes better if we do it right.
Right. I agree with you, Bridget. I think that's a good point. And at the Hojwek, what they do, like I mentioned, inside some of these houses that they have, is they orient the space to what people are most familiar with. So if they grew up in the 60s, the house might have kind of a retro theme to it. So I thought that was so fascinating. And for a lot of the seniors who grew up in DC, they know these streets, they know the city, but driving for folks with
Mm-hmm.
dementia and Alzheimer's is one of those like bellwether things. If you're driving and suddenly you don't know where you're going, like you're in some serious trouble. So not having to worry about that potentially, and seniors being able to walk freely in the city definitely gives another element of possibility here.
What are the current existing supports for folks who are aging in DC? What are they like right now?
Yeah, so DC, like I mentioned, there's a Department of Aging and Community Living, which is really the first call for a lot of people, including caregivers of people with Alzheimer's and dementia, or people who are just noticing that their parents for the first time are really starting to struggle with memory care. So they're calling up DACL, as the agency is called, and they're basically asking, where do I start? How do I help? And the director of DACL has her own story. She's a caretaker for her father, who is 99 years old, and she can talk to people from her own perspective about how hard it can be as a caretaker. It can feel isolating in its own way. So DACL provides community support. They direct people to nonprofits like Iona, I mentioned, where there are day centers and other facilities where seniors can get free lunches, free resources. These resources do exist, and it's pretty robust. So DACL calls it their senior service network. So if anyone's listening and curious about that, they should just look online. And there's a long list of free resources and low-cost resources for seniors. But I think from the housing perspective, that's an area where the city really needs to improve, and it's going to take that kind of community approach that we saw at this symposium. So we'll see where things go.
You mentioned that after the symposium, you were sort of hopeful and that you hadn't seen a lot of issues where there were so many different kinds of diverse stakeholders kind of invested in this being a solution. Where do you see this going from here?
Well, I think it's going to be what happens next with the Fletcher Johnson redevelopment, and what does the finalized plan look like? And I think that's going to be really the main thing to follow here, because the city should be moving on that fairly soon. And, the mayor will probably do a ribbon cutting and all of that. And I think that's when we'll have the chance to see, is this something that actually is going to come to fruition, or is it maybe just a good idea that wasn't quite able to be executed? But I think regardless, what that symposium enabled the city to do and those stakeholders there is to think about healthcare differently. And that was what the founders of the Hojwek really encouraged, beyond just, here's this great idea, you should maybe consider it, is to think holistically about how we define healthcare, how we define end of life care, and maybe just turn that completely on its head so that we're not trying to fit an old system into a model that needs changing.
Absolutely. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Bridget. Really appreciate it.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. And if you want to support important conversations like these, you can do that by becoming a member at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you soon.